In this section we're going to do some bark or rind grafting. That's the rind being the bark of the tree, and that's where you cut the bark and slip it away from the wood and then slip the scion between the wood and the bark. It's a pretty easy and accessible way to graft. There's a couple things that you need to know. First of all, the scion needs to be smaller than the stalk, so you can't take two pieces the same size and use this graft. In fact, the scion needs to be quite a bit smaller than the stalk. You also have to wait until the bark is slipping from the wood. So in the wintertime the bark sticks to the wood, and if you try to peel it off it just tears and rips, and it kind of just leaves pieces stuck to the wood. During the active growing season the bark will slip and easily separate from the wood, so that can be anywhere from right before growth starts in the spring or late winter, depending on where you're at, and sometime into the summer. Sometime in late summer or fall, the bark will stick back onto the wood. Let's talk for a minute about how this works. Like I said, we're going to cut the bark, peel it away, and slip the scion in between the bark and the wood. So if I just say cut down here, for instance, pry this open gently. This is actually a little sticky because this piece of wood has been sitting around, but I think it'll be okay. So when I do this, I'm dividing the cambium layer. The cambium layer is the active growing part, but part of it sticks to the wood and part of it sticks to the bark, I guess is the simple version. So when we put the scion in, it's cut, say, to a wedge like this, for instance. There's different ways you can cut it. But the cambium on this is exposed on this cut between the bark and the wood, and it's going to be touching the cambium layer that's clinging to the wood here. And that's really what makes this work. The expert walnut grafter Alex Scions taught us to cut the back of the scion off like this to expose a little bit of this to the bark where it can heal, and I've just taken that to cutting actually kind of a strip off of there. So if I do that, I have contact against the wood and against the bark with the back here. Now with this method the scion definitely needs to be smaller than the stalk, like I said, but you also have to match the size of the scion to the stalk. If I'm working with a small piece like this, so this is like you know, under an inch, and usually under an inch I'm starting to think about using a different graft, and I try to use a large scion, you can see that it may or may not contact the cambium because this curvature is really strong and this cut is flat. Now obviously you could scoop this out and match this curve, but that's probably a little more trouble than you need to go to. And you could also just use instead a cleft graft and split this, put in two scions and call it good. Or with this size of stalk you could probably even just graft on a whip and tongue on the outside. So with a smaller diameter stalk you just use smaller scions, and then you don't have this long, wide, flat surface preventing the cambium on this cut contacting the wood on the stalk, which has this curve to it. Does that make sense, I hope? So match the size of the scion to the stalk. Again, if it's not working out, just consider using a different graft. Use a cleft graft. It'll heal up pretty fast if it's small like this and the tree is vigorous and you put in one on each side. The cleft will probably be healed over in the first year, very likely. We're going to prepare a couple of scions. These are for my apple breeding trials, and this is just a red-fleshed apple that seems promising, and it seems like it might be better than its parent, so I want to copy it and have a backup and also just have it growing more places so I can get more fruit and test it and stuff like that. So I'm going to cut part way through and then turn this and kind of split it and cut it off at an angle. So that gives this a little flat spot here that's going to catch on the stalk when I slide it in. It's like a stop, right? It can't go any further than that, and that'll help stabilize the graft. And then on the back I'm just going to cut a little bit of the bark off on the back. Now on this one I'm going to do a little experiment here. I'm curious about doing it this way instead. So I'm just going to cut this off straight. I'm just going to spin my knife around the stalk and then snap it off. And then I'm going to cut in the same way I did, but what I just did with like turning the knife and cutting that slope down is a little bit awkward. So my idea was just to make that first cut and then split . this. So I have a flat and I have my stop. And then on the back, I'm going to cut this all to a wedge all the way down till this is a sharp wedge. Maybe just flatten this off a little. I don't know. It's just an idea. It seems like a good idea because it exposes more cambium on the back here, and it just seemed easier. Although now that I've done it, it didn't seem that much easier. But again, you can experiment like this as long as you're following the rules. You know we need good cambial contact, and we have that here, and we have even probably better contact here than on the other piece. So let's put it in there and we'll see if they make it. Okay, we're going to take our saw. You don't need this. Pry that up. You don't need much because this wedge will take care of actually opening the bark pretty well. Slip that in. Done. Same thing on the other side. Now the reason I use 2 grafts here is several-fold. First of all, it's insurance in case one dies, and these are a little dicey because I just cut them off a green tree and cut off the leaves. And also, if they both grow, like say I only need this one's going to help keep this side of the stalk alive. Like the stalk has a reason to be alive, and it's drawing sap. You could think of it as the scion is drawing sap to this side of the cut, so it won't like die. And if we didn't have this extra scion, it's possible that the bark could kind of die back in this direction a little bit on this side, or that side, whichever. Now, if you're grafting larger pieces, these are pretty small and they're already feel fairly stable, so I'm not really worried about those. If you're doing larger scions in a larger stalk, you'll often need to nail them. You can just get a small plain steel nail. I've used galvanized without any trouble, even though I've heard it's toxic. I would probably stay away from coppers because it's supposed to be toxic, but that's not likely you're going to have copper nails anyway. They're not very common. Plain steel if you have them, just really small, thin nails, and all they are is to keep the scion from moving while it heals. Because of course a larger scion has more leverage and more mass to help it move around. These little guys they're not gonna move that much if I just wrap it really well. And I'm gonna put 2 wraps on this to make sure it's nice and tight. I'm gonna be a little more careful to get this one real tight. There we go. That feels good. Okay, you just tuck this under itself, pull it tight, and the last thing I'm going to do is put some grafting paint. This could be white glue, it could be wax, it could be pine pitch, and I'm just going to gop that up really good. There's no such thing as too much on this. Never hurts to coat the scion. Again, it's just more insurance. You do a lot of these things that might help the graft succeed, and then if something goes wrong, they're more likely to make it. Okay, looks good. We're going to go to the vise and pretend to do a larger stalk. Alright, on a stalk this size, I'm going to do 3 scions. Again, you don't have to pry this very much because the wedge, when you slide the scion in, is going to open it. So you can do just a slope like this without that little shelf at 90 degrees that I cut earlier in that other scion. And that's okay. I'll tell you why that's okay or not in a minute. And this one, I'm going to try to do my thing again with this 90 degrees. Okay, so I got my 90 degree there. I'm going to come in here, nice and safe. So that gives me this, And then I'm going to take the back and cut this. This is really awkward trying to work on camera, because normally I'd have this pulled in close to my body where you wouldn't be able to see it. Okay, so I'm going to put a slope on the back too, and then insert that. I think I like this method. I'm very confident that it will actually work. I don't have any reason to think it wouldn't work. Or you can use very small scions in a big stock. That's okay too. And again, that other method, we can just cut in about halfway, you know, about to the center. And then turn this corner with the knife. Again, awkward working on camera in a strange position. And then cut that to a slope. And that looks pretty good. Now this isn't very long, but that's also a very short scion, so just cut a little off the back. Now with these guys, they don't need to be long. If I'm grafting onto an existing tree like I was earlier, and I'm trying to grow just a little fruiting branch off the side somewhere, I'm going to leave the scion, you know, as long as it is with multiple buds. I'm assuming that in this case, I'm trying to, say, regrow the top of a tree that's been broken off by a bear, which happens a lot here. And I'm only going to pick, you know, 1 or 2 shoots to grow really tall and really fast. So I really only need to leave 2 buds for each of these scions. There's 2 there. Also, I don't usually choose wood like this. Like this here is 2-year-old wood and this is 1-year-old wood. So if I was really grafting this, I would actually choose this, although this would probably grow fine. But now what's important is that these don't move while they heal, because if they shift like that, then it's going to break the healing tissues that they're merging together from this, and then the scion is either going to die or it has to start over again. If there's anything growing on it, like it has shoots on it, it's going to die if it gets broken. So you really want to make sure these are solid. That's very important. You can do that by just wrapping, if you wrap it a lot and wrap it really tight. But when you're done, test it, you know, just to make sure. I'm not really worried about these little guys here, but I am worried about this one, especially since it doesn't have that little, you know, shelf. It's just a plain slope. And that is where we're going to think about putting in a nail. This one's actually a little long, but I just went in the shed and grabbed whatever I could find. This one's a little longer than it needs to be. And I think with this scion, yeah, that single nail's going to be fine. Like down here, it's actually fairly stable. So this split doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it splits, that's fine. This is some new grafting tape I just got, which so far I'm not impressed with. It's biodegradable, which is really cool, because I could kind of just, you know, forget about it. If it's really thin and stretchy and it breaks down in the sun, I could just wrap it and kind of forget about it. But it just, I don't know. It seems hard to use or something. I just thought I'd test it. It was really cheap. Well, maybe it's okay. Yeah. Oh, and it sticks to itself like plastic foam. That's kind of nice. It's so thin that I feel like I can't get a really good pull, like a really good stretch, and so I end up just using a ton of it. Also, I used it and then I came back and the graft I had done, the very first graft I did with it, had moved. Like a bird landed on it or something. Make sure they're seated. That one was squishing out. And just test them. Like this doesn't feel all that stable to me. It's wiggling more than I want it to. Since there's 3, it's probably okay if these 2 will make it and that one doesn't because it gets bumped. Not the end of the world, but I'd like to see this wrapped tighter, and I'm just not getting, you know, the tightness I want out of this. So I'm going to use this electrical tape because I know I can get that super butt tight. And this electrical tape's toast anyway. It's gotten hot a few too many times and it gets all sticky, you know what I mean? So like both sides are sticky. In fact, it's kind of like all the glue is sticking to the outside. Like I have to use the tape backwards or something. So let's see if I stretch this really tight. And you could also use strips of cloth, string, whatever. Okay, that definitely feels a little bit better. Now whatever your seal is, this needs to be sealed with something. Again, you could use all kinds of different stuff. I would use that grafting paint, Doc Farwell's, that I always use. I'm just going to make that real thick, and then it doesn't hurt to come back and check it later, because as it dries it might separate. There's a pretty good gap right here. You guys can't see it, but I'll show it to you. I just got grafting paint on my camera. My poor cameras. Honestly, I'm surprised it's lasted this long. All right, let's do it up. So you see these big gaps here? Well, I'm gonna really put a bunch of wax over those. Well, paint. This is really more paint than wax. But it doesn't hurt to come back and check those, because a gap may open up as the paint dries. Just try to put a lot on there so that doesn't happen. The one other thing I like to do with this method is I just like to come just slightly down the sides, because this paint is really thick and it kind of sticks to itself, so it makes sort of a cap. And then I'm going to coat these. And don't worry, those buds will push through this, no problem. Anyway, you get the idea. I'm not going to finish this, but just I'm just compelled to finish it. All right, that's it. The bark or rind grafting. And you know, there's obviously variations. I like this graft. I don't use it a ton. I've been trying to use it more on anything that's at all large, if I can get away with it and the Scions match. And I don't really mind, though, doing cleft grafts, which are really easy and really fast, into wood like 3/4 of an inch and down, which I think it's generally better suited for unless you have really small Scions. Good option to have. And there are other options. You know, I would rather do a lot of different things than take a stock this big and split it and make a cleft graft, because that just makes a really large, open, deep wound, especially if it's horizontal like this, like if you're cutting a tree off and then you split it like that. That's pretty bad news. So you can cut wedge-shaped slots into the side and cut the Scions to fit it, push those in, and then wrap those. There's another one I haven't tried, but you can cut saw kerfs and then cut the Scions to kind of fit that and pound them and jam them down in there. So there's lots of options. I think a cleft graft in something this size is about the last thing I would do if I had any option, and you pretty much always do. All right, in the next video we're going to examine frameworking, which is how to take an existing tree and kind of work it over to a new variety without cutting the whole tree apart or cutting it down to big stubs like this, because there are really better ways to do it.